3 years ago my sister was murdered by a man who broke into her house. I was hidden by my sister. I didn't get a good look at the murderer. I started wandering around looking for him because of the strange odor I smelled. My sister was in that kind of work. The neighbors were prejudiced against him, but my sister was kind to me 3 years later. I realized that Su Xiaoqing had a similar smell. Then I realized, what was the smell I'd been searching for 3 years? On a summer night in June 2000, my sister, who was my companion, was killed by a man in her bedroom. The neighbors said my sister deserved it. The murderer was brought to the house by my sister herself. My sister was in that kind of business whenever there were guests in the house. My sister would always tell me to hide in a small room, turn off the lights, don't look, don't listen, don't make any noise. But that man was smothered to death with a pillow afterward. My sister even took his hard-earned money. It wasn't until long after the man left I realized something was wrong in my little room. I opened the door and went into my sister's room. She was already lying on the bed, not moving. I called out to him gently, but all I could feel was his cold hand. The police arrived the next day. They took my sister's body away. When the police were about to take me with them, I ran away. I didn't want them to send me to a place of homeless children. I didn't want to be adopted by any stranger. I wanted revenge. I'm going to kill him myself. I'll kill him myself, to avenge my sister's death. Maybe in the eyes of others, sister is a dirty, bad girl. But I know in this world past, present and future only my sister was the best to me. I hate the person who killed her, even if I have to risk my life. I will kill her myself. I will kill her with my own hands. I'm confident I could find the murderer before the police did, although I didn't see the murderer's face that night, but I smelled that man's odor. A unique, secretive and otherworldly odor. I've been sensitive to smells since I was a child. There are many smells I can memorize them in my mind after just one smell. But this time, no matter how I think about it, I couldn't figure out what exactly did that man smell like. After my sister died, I began to wander the streets. I hoped to find the truth about the odor. I hoped to find the truth about the smell. I thought that man must be in some special profession, or had a special identity. That's why he left a distinctive odor on his body that ordinary people can't smell. But all the people I've met, their smell was different from that man's. 3 whole years have passed since then, when I had begun to suspect that man was no longer in this city. Yesterday at an ordinary intersection, a man in a coat and scarf covering himself up tightly passed by me, and the smell that had been missing for 3 years instantly rushed into my nostrils. At that moment I felt my blood start to burn. I immediately started to follow him quietly and witnessed that person into an old neighborhood that was about to be demolished. At that moment, I had already made up my mind when this man appeared again, I would rush over and kill him. I even hid under the $1 building where he lived. I spent the whole night in ambush, but the next morning when that man came out of the flat again, when I had rushed out from my hiding place, I was ready to kill him with a single blow. When I reached him, I realized it was a woman, a tall and beautiful woman. In the woman's slightly shocked eyes, I ran away. I ran back to the camp. It was a camp backed by a garbage dump. It's the only camp for the homeless. For the last 6 months, I've been staying here at night. Yellow Hair said hello to me. He handed me a half-eaten can of beef. I don't know where he found it. I took it and thanked him. You didn't come back last night. You went to see Shunny's man again? I nodded my head. The police can't even find him. Why did you bother? I looked down and took a bite of meat, but I couldn't eat anymore. You don't even know what the murderer looks like. I gave the can back to Yellow Hair. I looked at him coldly. I'm done. I'm done. You look like you want to kill again. Yellow Hair said. Fortunately I lowered my head and no longer say anything but, brother, I still admire you. You'd rather sleep and eat than avenge your sister's death. You're like the ancient warrior. Yellow Hair is probably trying to lighten the mood. He's trying to lighten the mood by sucking up to me. I smiled bitterly, but I couldn't help the pain in my heart. Yellow Hair finished eating the rest of the can suddenly. He said, I heard that May is going to improve the cityscape. I don't know, will the city police arrest us and send us to the shelter? I glanced at Yellow Hair. He casually asked if we could settle down. Would you be willing to do that? Yellow Hair licked his lips. He tilted his head and said, you are the only one who wants to be a warrior, but you won't let me fight with a sword too. If you find your sister's murderer, don't do anything rash. Call your buddies. We'll take care of him for you. I smiled. I said, good buddy. Seriously, with your small arms and legs, against the kind of vicious murderer. Conceived a few times, Yellow Hair said with a serious expression. To be honest, although we are both wanderers, but you at least have someone to love you unlike me. I want to have a sister too. Why don't you take me to my sister's grave? I'll do the same. When Yellow Hair gets excited, he tends to ramble on and on. Get some rest. I patted him helplessly. I haven't slept for a day and a night. I want to get a good night's sleep. More importantly, I want to see my sister in my dream. I dreamt of my sister again. She hugged me and stroked my head. She said, you don't think I'm dirty, do you? No. Sis, I never thought you were dirty. I know. You're doing this so that we can live a good life. Good girl. When I've saved up enough money, I'll buy us a big house. Then I'll take you to eat good food every day. I'll take you to the outside world to see the world. I'll even take you to see the outside world. I really don't want to leave. You. My sister hugged me and started crying. Then I felt her being pulled away from me. It was that man who smelled so strange. My sister cried out for help. A hand was pulling me down. I cried out for help. I woke up when my sister was pulling me. I realized it was Yellow Hair pushing me. Look at me. I've got a big mouth. Get up. Run. The city city police are really here. I was sleepy. I saw some vans coming from the darkness in the distance, and then many men in uniform jumped out of the vans. Their flashlights shone toward the camp. It started a lot of noise and shouting. Run! If you get caught, you'll be in trouble, Yellow Hair said and ran toward the mountain of garbage behind us. I hurriedly followed him. Behind me, I heard the city officials yelling, "Don't run!" In the darkness of the night, Yellow Hair and I climbed over the mountain of garbage on our hands and knees. As soon as we landed, a pillar of light shone towards us. Waiting for a rabbit, I was waiting for it. In front of the two little guys, a big, burly city policeman said while I was in a daze. Yellow Hair on the side suddenly rushed toward the city manager and pounced on him. Yellow Hair shouted, "Run away! Remember to avenge our sister." Yellow Hair's rush. The policeman sidestepped him. He looked back at me. He said, "What are you waiting for? Why don't you run?" I nodded. I ran towards the small door on the other side of the garbage dump. Just as I reached the door, I heard a thud behind me. Yellow Hair seemed to have been kicked by the city police. He's now on the ground. "Thank you, buddy," I called out to Yellow Hair. Yellow Hair slowly raised his head. He stretched out his hand and gestured something, but from afar, I saw him grinning. He seemed to be smiling. A few days later, I was walking down the street. I heard people talking about a story. They were talking about a news story in Guangzhou. A college student was beaten to death in a shelter because he didn't have a temporary residence permit. Was beaten to death in a shelter. I don't know what's happening to Yellow Hair and the others. Besides Yellow Hair, there's also Brother Hui and Old Wolf. These are my friends from the campy. Never saw them again. Maybe we'll see each other again, and those who deserve to die will never survive. The day after Yellow Hair and the others were captured, I continued to follow them. The woman who smelled like that, although he wasn't my sister's murderer, but he must have some connection with the murderer. I believe that if I continue to follow her, I'm sure I'll find what I'm looking for. Xiao Shuqing, that's the name of the woman I followed. She's not very old. She lives alone on the second floor of that bed. The reason why I think she lives alone, I didn't see anyone else coming out of her house. She has a normal job. She runs a clothing store at the intersection next to the hospital in the city center. She runs a clothing store. The intersection looks like it has more traffic, but most of the people who come and go, most of them are in a hurry to go to the hospital, so his clothing store doesn't seem to be doing very well. Su Xiaoqing doesn't seem to have much business sense. Apart from this background for me, one more important clue is that Su Xiaoqing has a boyfriend. On Valentine's Day, I saw her holding a bouquet of flowers. She went home with a bouquet of flowers. There's a good chance Su Xiaoqing's smell is related to her boyfriend. But the problem is, her boyfriend, I've never seen him once. Of course, I didn't keep an eye on Su Xiaoqing 24 hours a day. Even when I follow her now, I try to hide far away. After all, he bumped into me last time. If it's too frequent, if I frequent his workplace or residence, I'm sure he'll be suspected. I'll get myself in trouble. I told myself not to be too hasty. I've waited so long. Don't disturb the fish that's about to be hooked. In the second week after Huang Mao and his men were arrested by the city police, I finally met Su Xiaoqing's boyfriend. He was a thin-looking young Manon. The outside he looked like Leon Lai from the Four Kings of Heaven. It was only when I saw him that I remembered this man. I've actually seen him once before at Su Xiaoqing's store. I've seen him once before, but the last time he came to the store he looked like a passerby. He was just a passerby. He didn't even talk to Su Xiaoqing behind the counter. She didn't even communicate with Su Xiaoqing, so much so I didn't associate him with Su Xiaoqing's boyfriend. But this time I noticed some unusual details after the man entered the clothing store. Although he still didn't say a word to Su Xiaoqing, but Su Xiaoqing took the initiative to take a dress. She invited the man to try it on. The man changed into the dress in front of the mirror. Su Xiaoqing's clothes. The size was just right. While Su Xiaoqing was helping the man to change his clothes, Su Xiaoqing leaned forward as if she wanted to hug the man from behind. All these details imply Su Xiaoqing is not only familiar with the man in front of her, she's also in a relationship with him, but for some reason they have to pretend they don't know each other. Is it possible that Su Xiaoqing is this man's mistress? When the man walked out of the clothing store, I immediately followed him quietly. As long as from the man I'll be able to recognize his unique scent, I am 100% sure the murderer of my sister was him. But I didn't realize this man seems to be extraordinarily vigilant. As soon as he stepped out of the clothing store, he started to look back within a few steps. He was very sensitive to his surroundings. I couldn't follow him, but it didn't matter. I already knew who this man was, because it wasn't long before I saw him from afar. He walked into the hospital 100 meters away. Yes, a doctor. No wonder Su Xiaoqing opened her clothing store here. What's the special smell of a doctor? The smell of alcohol, the smell of hydrogen peroxide, or some kind of medicine? No! What I smelled, it's not the usual hospital smells. Unless this doctor is seeing someone, unless this doctor is dealing with something unusual, and he has to administer the medicine himself. Over time, he would have to apply the medication himself for a long time. But if that's the case, that's not true, because if the doctor smells like that, then the patient must have it too. But in the past 3 years, I've only smelled it on Su Xiaoqing. She smelled something similar to that bowl. It doesn't make sense, although I still can't figure out the truth of the smell. But I've decided to change my next target to this one, the mysterious male doctor. But I realized that it's very difficult to carry out. This man is different from Su Xiaoqing. He is very alert. Several times in front of the hospital, when I was close to the man's back, he would subconsciously look back. He seems to realize that someone is following him. It's also very difficult to watch outside the hospital, because every time the security guard saw me, he would chase me away. He seems to think I'm a beggar outside the hospital. But if I stay farther away, when it's dark, I can't tell when this man left work after my first mistake at Su Xiaoqing's house. I've become extra careful. I'd rather slow things down a bit. I want everything to be stable before I make a move. I think if we can't break through at the hospital, I'll have to go back to Su Xiaoqing. I don't believe it. They re content to meet in that clothing store. They're just content to see each other at the clothing store, and this opportunity will come soon. Ever since I followed Su Xiaoqing, he went to the store early almost every day, but that day Su Xiaoqing didn't come downstairs until the afternoon. He was carrying a handbag. His face was painted with delicate makeup. Obviously, he was going to meet someone important to him. He must be very important to him. I followed him from a distance. I could tell he was in a good mood today. Sometimes his toes were up. He jumped a few steps on the road, but he didn't seem to be in a hurry. Occasionally, he would stop to show off the primroses planted by the roadside. After walking around for about an hour or so, I followed him to his destination. It was a park on the outskirts of the city that hadn't yet been built. There were hardly any people there. Su Xiaoqing walked slowly into the park. She found a bench and sat down. She looked so relaxed. She didn't look like she was waiting for someone. It's as if she's having a picnic alone. I saw her take out a food box from her handbag and opened the lid. She looked like she was going to eat it by herself, but soon she carefully closed it again and put it back in her bag, just to take it out to admire the contents of the box. And so the hours passed. It's getting dark. There's no one in the park now, but Su Xiaoqing still has no intention of leaving. It seems there's someone he needs to wait for. Around 8 o'clock, I quietly came out from my hiding place. I was going to take a stroll around the neighborhood, but not far from the park, I almost collided with a hurried figure. Luckily, he didn't give me a second glance. He went on his way, but I recognized him. That person was the doctor Su Xiaoqing was waiting for. I was glad that he wasn't suspicious of my sudden appearance. When he was skeptical, in even greater confusion a few seconds later, an even bigger puzzle hit me, because just now when this man passed me by, I didn't smell on him. I didn't smell the scent I remembered so well. Was it wrong again? The park is completely dark. There was only moonlight on the wooded paths, and the benches that still smell of paint. But lovers don't care about that. This environment may have a different kind of romance to it. I watched Su Xiaoqing and that man from afar. Su Xiaoqing took out the food box from this afternoon. She put it in front of the man. He whispered something. I was hiding too far away. I couldn't hear a word. I am still thinking back. I am still thinking about the moment I passed that man. He didn't have that smell on him. So Su Xiaoqing's scent didn't come from this man. Then who else has he been in contact with? No one else. What the hell? Just when I couldn't help but feel anxious, I suddenly realized Su Xiaoqing in the distance wanted to cry so much he covered his face with his hands. His shoulders were trembling and the stone box was spilled from the bench. It spilled onto the ground. Faced with Su Xiaoqing's sudden crying, the man was obviously at a loss. He just sat there in silence. Su Xiaoqing raised her head and said something to the man. What? Only then did the man seem to react. He reached out and slowly took the crying Su Xiaoqing in his arms. But Su Xiaoqing was in the man's arms, lying in the man's arms for only a minute or two, suddenly pushed the man away and stood up violently. The next scene, I was really shocked because Su Xiaoqing actually started to take off her clothes one by one. Coat, jacket, jeans. He just took off all the coverings on his body one by one. He took them all off, throwing them to the ground. The silhouette of his body came into my eyes. I was stunned. I was really shocked, but on the other hand, he had to admit, in the moonlight, it was a nearly perfect anthropomorphic body. Then Su Xiaoqing took a few steps backward. The man with the face suddenly stretched out his hand, seems to be saying something again. The first time he said it, I didn't hear it clearly, but the second time his voice got louder. I heard Su Xiaoqing shouting at the man to hug me, but the man's reaction this time was beyond my expectation. He suddenly covered his mouth with his hand. A hoarse sound came out of his throat. Then he suddenly jumped up from the bench. He almost flew out of the room as fast as he could. At that moment, Su Xiaoqing began to laugh, but that laughter sounded particularly sad as he laughed. He crouched down, started to pick up the food boxes that fell to the ground. Little by little, what was in the food box? Then I heard him cry. He held the box in his arms on this cold spring night, naked and slowly curled up on the ground, crying uncontrollably. After that, I still went to Su Xiaoqing's house. I went to Su Xiaoqing's house, but I almost never saw him go out again, including the clothing store. He doesn't seem to go there anymore. I can't help it. Although he doesn't go out, but I still have no choice but to continue to squat, because I already know that doctor who has some kind of relationship with him doesn't have the smell I'm looking for. The problem still lies with Su Xiaoqing alone. This is the clue. I've been waiting for 3 years. No matter what, I had to keep waiting. One afternoon 2 weeks later, Su Xiaoqing once again wore exquisite makeup. She appeared in front of the darkened apartment building. She was still wearing the same coat as last time and carrying the same bag as last time, but her face was no longer as happy as last time. Instead, there was an indescribable indifference. I quietly followed him again. I saw him. He actually went back to the park where he met the doctor last time, and he sat on the same bench as last time. He just sat there without moving, like a statue. Is he waiting for the doctor? From where I hid last time, I crept forward a little more so that I could see him better this time. The night came again. The moonlight reflected on Su Xiaoqing's face. Not long after, there were footsteps in the distance. Look at the figure. It's really the doctor. The man hurriedly walked to Su Xiaoqing, but he didn't sit down beside him. He just stood there, because he was closer this time. With the wind, I could hear what the man said. He said, "Haru, I'll see you one last time. Let's not get involved anymore, okay?" Su Xiaoqing raised her face. She smiled a little. Then she put her handbag aside. She stood up again. "Open your arms and hug me." The man looked at Su Xiaoqing. He looked at Su Xiaoqing with an expression of not knowing what to do. "Give me one last hug," Su Xiaoqing said with a smile. The man looked at Su Xiaoqing and seemed to hesitate for a moment, but he finally reached out his hand and took this beautiful woman in front of him into his arms. Seeing them hugging each other, I couldn't help but think of my sister, because she used to hug me too. Hugging is a wonderful gesture. Sometimes it represents a feeling that you don't want to part with, and sometimes it represents the emotion of parting. Su Xiaoqing was held tightly in the man's arms. A small sound came out of her mouth. One hand can't help grabbing grabbing the man's back tightly. The other hand suddenly had a knife in it. In the next second, the tip of the knife was plunged into the man's back. The